Now with Node.js installed, let's now see how we use it by writing our first very simple piece of Node.js driven JavaScript code that we will then execute with Node.js. And for this, I'm in a brand new empty folder opened here in Visual Studio Code. And in this folder, I will create a new file, and I will name it app.js, but you can name it however you want. You can also name it site.js, but I'll just go with app.js here, since it holds my main demo JavaScript application that I want to build here. But app is a pretty big word here, actually, because we are going to start with a very, very simple demo application right now. Now here in this app.js file, let me zoom in a bit, we are now going to write some basic JavaScript code. I'll start by adding a constant, which I'll name username, and in there I'll store a string maximilian, so the text maximilian. And then I'll add a semicolon. This is JavaScript code which we could have written for the browser as well. We are defining a constant here. Alternatively, as you learned, we could also create a variable with let. That's also supported in Node.js, and in general, Node.js is just JavaScript. So what you learned about JavaScript still applies. It's the same syntax, the same rules. There only are some differences, like for example, in Node.js, since it does not execute in a browser, there is no DOM with which you could interact. You can't select and change HTML elements because it's now decoupled from a HTML-driven website. You must never forget that with Node.js, we write code that executes standalone on a computer, on a server. And whilst we might also be dealing with HTML files to some extent, there is no tight coupling as we have it in a browser. So there are differences like this, but the core syntax, like let and const, and the kind of values you can work with, that's the same. And therefore now we have this username, and then in another line, I will console log username. And that is also something we did before in the course already. We also logged something in the console of the browser. Now we will not execute this code with a browser, but we will execute it with Node.js instead. But as you will see with Node.js, we will also be able to log this to a console. It will just not be in the browser DevTools, but instead in a different place. Now with all that, if we save that file, we got this JavaScript file. How can we now execute that with Node.js? Well, as I emphasized multiple times, we don't execute it in a browser. Instead, we installed that Node.js tool, and therefore we now will use that tool to invoke and execute this code with it. Now, Node.js is not a tool like Word or Excel or PowerPoint that you install on your system and then open by clicking on some icon or anything like that. Instead, it is a tool that you invoke through the command line. And that is something you might have never worked with before, so let me quickly introduce you to it. No matter if you are on macOS or Windows, you will have a command line utility installed on your system. Because a command line is the most basic and primitive form of sending commands and actions to your operating system. So the command line is an interface that allows you as a computer user to talk to your computer and give it instructions. You do the same if you launch a program like PowerPoint, but there you have a graphical interface. A command line is basically the very primitive version of that, where you don't have a graphical interface, but where you instead write your own commands that will then be executed. Now on macOS, you can open Spotlight Search and type terminal in there to open the built-in terminal, which is your macOS command line interface. On Windows, you can open the command prompt application that's installed on Windows, out of the box by default on every Windows version. And it's this command prompt or terminal, which you opened here, that can then be used for running commands that will be executed by the operating system. Now, because we installed Node.js, Node will be a command that is recognized by the operating system. So we can execute our JavaScript code with Node.js through this terminal or command prompt. Now, doing it here in this default command prompt or terminal is a bit cumbersome because you would first of all have to navigate into the folder where your code is stored inside of that terminal. Because by default, this terminal will be navigated into some folder on your system, and you need to change to the folder that contains your code files. Now, it might be interesting to learn a bit more about this terminal and command prompt, and therefore attached you find a link that allows you to dive a bit deeper, but it's not the focus of this course because we also have a way easier way of executing our code and of running our terminal or command prompt focused on this project folder. And for this, we go back to Visual Studio Code. In there, you will have this terminal option here in your menu. And in there, you can click on New Terminal, both on Windows and Mac OS. Now, if you click there, this opens up an integrated terminal or command prompt, which is your default system command prompt or terminal. So the tool we just opened a couple of minutes ago, but integrated into Visual Studio Code, which is convenient because now you can see your code and issue operating system commands from the same screen. And it's also convenient because if you open this terminal here in Visual Studio Code, it will already be navigated into your project folder. So if we want to invoke the Node tool to execute the app.js file, we can just type the command in here in this terminal, and it will automatically be in this folder already. So interacting with our code file here will be very easy if we use this integrated terminal. And to show you what I mean, let's now use this terminal, which we just opened up here, and in there type node blank app.js. So the node command, which is a command I want to send to my operating system, and then after a blank, the file name. Now the node command will be available because we installed Node.js, this tool, and this file name is simply the file name I chose here. If you now hit enter, you should see your username here in this terminal. So we see the username we chose here in our terminal because of console log. And that's now the result of us executing this JavaScript code with this Node tool through this default system command prompt or terminal. And we're using the integrated terminal here so that we see it all on one screen, and we run this command already navigated into this project folder. Because if I would run the same command in my default terminal or command prompt opened outside of Visual Studio Code, this will most likely fail if I execute this. You see here I'm getting an error that it essentially can't find this app.js file. It might succeed for you if you did store your code file in the same folder as the terminal is navigated in by default, but most likely that's not the case. So here you would have to switch to your project folder first with the cd command. More on that can be learned with help of the attached link, but that's a bit cumbersome, and hence we use this built-in terminal instead. Now you can also always close this integrated terminal by clicking here on Close Panel or the trash icon, and then you can always reopen it if you want to.